Welcome to the Ultimate Farm Wife podcast. On this channel, we're going to be discussing all things marrying a farmer, moving to the land, and becoming integrated with a family farming operation. Whether you're moving to the farm for the first time or whether you're moving back into a family farming operation, we discuss the ins and the outs of all of it. So let's jump into today's episode.
Hi, and welcome to The Farm. Today we're talking You've Married a Farmer, Now What? And we're here with Kirsten. Kirsten, tell us a little bit about yourself, your family, and your farm.
Hi, Katia. It's wonderful to be here. So I live in southwest Victoria on a mixed farm. So we do cropping, so mainly wheat and canola, and we have sheep and cattle as well. And we also have a dairy about an hour and a half south of here as well, which is a relatively new sort of acquisition. Yeah, so very busy. Look, my husband does most of the on-farm dairying, not dairying, does most of the on-farm kind of farm work. And I help with the books and, picking up parts and all the random stuff that you do. But yeah, I've been here for 10 years now, which is great. But I'm originally from Sydney.
Beautiful. So tell me a little bit about growing up in Sydney and how did you meet your farmer and then transition to farm life?
Yeah, so I met my husband, Jared, in a bar in Melbourne. So I always say it's not my fault that I married a farmer or met a farmer. So I was a reporter for years for the ABC, and I still work for the ABC sort of casually now. But so a lot of people think that I met him on a story or whatever, and I used to, chop her out to rural Victoria and, cover farming stuff occasionally, really not actually knowing that much about rural life or farming at all at the time. But no, I met him in a bar in Melbourne, so in my turf. So I'd moved to Melbourne when I was 22. I got a cadetship with the ABC, and they do like a national pool. And that year there were quite a few of us from Sydney. So they sent me to Melbourne, I think probably because I said that I liked theatre and arts, and I loved Melbourne. So I just stayed in Melbourne, and was there for 8 years before I moved to the country. My husband in 2012, and we were married less than 18 months later. And here I am in beautiful Karamet in between Warrnambool and Hamilton.
Awesome. So tell me a little bit about your first impressions on the farm. Had you been there before you got married? Was there an introduction story?
Yeah, so I'd certainly come out quite regularly before we got married. That would be completely blind, wouldn't it? I made my husband come to Melbourne quite a few times. So it's 3 hours to Melbourne, but I just did that to test him, to test how interested he was. There was no way I was going to go 3 hours and stay with someone I just met who I knew had access to guns. And look, he has a gun license, and he is a perfectly great guy, so there's no worries there. But when you meet someone, these are the things that you think about. So I tested him by making him come to Melbourne, and he did many times. And then I came out to the farm, and the first thing that I remember was driving up going, okay, this better not be a property full of like burnt out vehicles and like those, when you see it you just go, this is not the type of person that I want to be with. So I was happy to see that it was just a house and a paddock. We've now renovated and I've got a lawn now, which is amazing. But at the time it was this like old shack in the paddock. But that's fine. Only the one car and no crap everywhere. And the other thing that I remember was how dark it was at night. We drove down to the pub with him and a few of his friends, and just being like, it's so dark because there's obviously no street lights, and then looking up and seeing the stars and thinking, this is amazing. This is beautiful. So that were my first impressions. And then, going out on the farm, I guess, it's a proper commercial operation and seeing how that works. I'd been on farms before as a reporter, so it wasn't the first time I'd been on a farm, but yeah, I really liked it. Like, I loved the space. It was interesting to me. It was like an adventure. And I suppose when you first start dating for someone, you don't know if it's going to be for a few months or forever. So I just kind of was like, oh, just a bit of an adventure, And then unfortunately / fortunately, I fell in love. So here I am.
You are. So tell me about that transition to the farm when you did make it official.
Yeah, well, we got married, and again, we got married, I guess, quite early on in the piece, because I wasn't going to move to the farm without knowing that we had a strong commitment. And I don't think you necessarily have to be married to, be in a committed relationship. But for me, it was important because I was really changing my lifestyle and my career significantly, to be moving from a sort of TV journo role to living in the country. And this was before, like, we didn't even have proper internet. And that was one of my, like, kind of non-negotiables, is like, we have to get internet. And to my husband's credit, like, he did everything. Like, he was climbing up on the roof trying to put up big satellite dishes, and it still wasn't reliable at the time. But I knew that my career was going to look different. So that's why I wanted to get married. And then so we got married, and I was still working in Melbourne technically. And then I got a sort of temporary transfer down in Warrnambool, which is sort of 50 minutes away. And I was working there, and that was good. And I fell pregnant, sort of, I didn't mean to, like, I wanted to have kids, so it was always on the cards, but I fell pregnant. We got married, and a couple of months later I fell pregnant, essentially. So that kind of solved the problem of what am I going to do with my life and my career. And I fell pregnant and I was 29. I was like, okay, well, this is what I'm going to do. And it's all worked out well. But honestly, at the time, it was really difficult to suddenly lose your career, move to an entirely different town, not have those support systems, and then have a baby. And the having a baby thing was the hardest part. Like, as in, I think that's hard for anyone, right? Your first child, it's such a big change. So I struggled, to be honest. I think I would have been going along just fine if I hadn't have had the baby so early. But because suddenly I didn't have my work and I wasn't able to get back to Melbourne really easily, my good friends in Melbourne didn't have kids yet. So I felt quite alone, and had to really kind of get my head around a lot in that first year of my eldest life was tough. I mean, amazing, right? You fall in love with your little baby, and there are great things too, but I won't lie, I did struggle.
Absolutely. And so much to unpack there. So when you first moved to the farm, how did you and your husband go around introducing you to the community, or finding, even within that first 12 months, 2 years, finding your people? How did you go about that?
That is such a great question, and so important. So my husband is a little bit older than me. So he's 12 years older than me. So his friends, who are all great, are the same age as him. Like, a lot of them he went to school with, or, and so they all had kids, but their kids were older at the time. They were primary school aged kids, and now they've all got teenage kids. But it meant that they were at a very different stage of life. It's a stage of life I'm in now. And I think you don't kind of walk into a group of friends. You don't make friends with a group of people. You make friends with individuals. And I think my husband was just like, your friends can be my friends, and job done. And he's got great friends, and honestly, all of them are great people. But I definitely have closer relationships with some that I made on an individual basis than with others. And a lot of them, again, all went to school together, or so they had this kind of amazing bond with each other that I can't walk into and replicate. No one can. And again, I'm 12 years younger, grew up in a different space. And I think someone like, that they talk about friendship is common interests plus time. You can't replicate 20 years or 10 years. So I still, I loved when my friends from Melbourne or Sydney would come out, or still needed to come to see them a lot as well, because that's, the people that I already have and still had to this day. But another way that I made friends was, while I said having a baby was tough in the first year, Mum's group was the best thing. I still have some best friends from that 10 years on. In fact, one of them is definitely one of my best friends. She was just at my place on the weekend with her kids, and my kids are the same age as hers. And, it's kind of like that friendship formed in the trenches of early motherhood together. And yeah, they're some of the best friends that I still have to this day. And then the broader community. Oh, I love my community so much, as in like my neighbours, the other farmers, and they're all different ages. Like I've got friends who are in their 70s and friends who are in their 20s, and we're all just part of the community. And that developed really quite early on. It's like as soon as I was here, everyone just embraced me, and was so supportive, and it's still that community to this day. And we've had newcomers like my neighbour. You should interview her. She hasn't married a farmer. They were going to get married, and then COVID happened. So they didn't get married. They had kids instead. So, and now they're like, I don't know if we'll get married. But she was a newcomer to the community for, about 4 or 5 years ago. And we certainly embraced her just the same way I was embraced. So I think the community has been like the best part of it.
Yeah, absolutely. Really nice to hear that your husband had such a strong friend group that he was able to introduce you to, and that time has created beautiful bonds between some of his friends and yourself. Great to hear there was a mother's group in your area, because I know that a lot of rural and remote communities don't have those. And then again, just so nice to hear that the community was so inclusive, because I know that there are also a lot of communities where, us moving to the area, we're the youngest in the community, and that's really hard sometimes to find your groove when you're the youngest and everyone is 20, 30, 40 years older and just living in different decades. So I'm really glad that you were able to find that. It's really nice that you were able to break that down into a couple of different elements of different types of friendships and groups, and finding that support network there.
Yeah, and my in-laws were also great. So my in-laws, farm with us, and they are, on another property just sort of 5 k's down the road, or the same farm, obviously, but they have always been really supportive of me, and included me in things. And my mother-in-law would invite me out with her friends, and I'd be hanging out with a group of 60 and 70-year-olds. But, they were great, And then I'd often sort of meet their children through them, and that was really good. And other women, it's really interesting. I have a mixture of friends, like friends who've grown up in the region, but I instantly became really good friends with other women who had married farmers. Like some of my best friends, one was from Newcastle originally, one was from the Gold Coast, and others from Melbourne. And I think we just have that shared bond of being that sort of fish out of the water thing, and also knowing that each other needs those social networks, because we've actually uprooted ourselves and left them.
Yeah, absolutely. And you're right. They're some of the strongest bonds, because you've got those commonalities. It's that commonality with that time that you spoke about earlier. Absolutely. So every day is different on the farm. So when you first moved to the farm, how did you integrate into doing some of those jobs that you spoke about earlier, so parts runs and things like that? Did a slow movement into those roles, or was it sort of like, right, you're here and I need help? Let us know about how that transition happened.
I think it's still happening. Like, I think it's something that just gets negotiated throughout your life. And I think that this is kind of me reflecting back of 10 years of being married, that it all just depends on where you're at in your life. And because I had a baby so early, it meant that obviously became my focus. And then I had my second child soon after, less than 2 years after. So I was very much primary carer, looking after the children, not really able to kind of get out on the farm too much. I do remember helping my husband while being heavily pregnant and wearing his clothes, because I had nothing else to wear. And having to like sort of stand back from any kind of like livestock, because I obviously didn't want to get kicked in the stomach. So, but look, to be honest, I've never had that much of a role on the farm, because even before kids, my career has been very important to me. And back then it was as a journalist. And so I also didn't want to stop being a journalist when I moved to the farm, because I was worried about how big the change would be. I was already changing my whole life to kind of leave a job that I loved. I changed it, but to leave it entirely, I think would have been really detrimental to my mental health. So I'm glad I kept it. And then, after sort of, then I had my two kids. And then just when my eldest was starting primary school, COVID happened. So it was like I had this kind of extended at-home period. And and then after that, it's been like negotiating that. I started doing more of the book work. I suppose I've always been picking up parts here and there. That's never much of a big thing. It's kind of like, okay, you're in town, might as well pick it up. I did book work for about 4 years alongside, being the primary care of my kids and, doing other bits and pieces in the kind of media realm. But then I decided actually I really want to do what I love a bit more. Like I don't mind doing the books, and I enjoyed being part of the farming business and learning a lot about, a significant business. But I kind of was like, you know what, I want to do something for me again, and what brings me purpose and joy. So that's why I started my business, which is the Rural Podcasting Co., which is taking my love of rural communities and rural people and kind of media podcasting in this instance, and going, you know what, I want to make podcasts about rural things and help other people in podcasting make podcasts. So yeah, that's why I started it, and I'm loving it.
If you're enjoying listening along with us today and learning some tips, tricks, and advice from our ladies, then please like, subscribe, and even share this interview with someone who you think would need to hear this information or who might benefit from other interviews done right here on this channel. Now let's get back into today's episode. Yeah, absolutely. That's so good and really important about having something that you can call your own on farm. We've talked about that in multiple out of the interviews as well, and I'm so glad that you've brought it up again. You've got to have something of your own, something that drives you. So you've taken on some of the books, or you've taken on the books. Tell me the transition for that, because I know that a lot of people, when they get handed the farm books, it's like, well, this is up to you now. Enjoy, good luck, or they might have like an hour session on it. How was that transition for you? Was there an introduction? Was there a handover?
Yeah, look, there was an introduction. My father-in-law, who still looks after the books in some respects as well, it helped me transition, and that was great, because I work a lot better with my father-in-law than I do my own husband, to be honest. Like my husband and I work really well as husband and wife, but in terms of like that kind of, like, I don't know, what do you call it? Is it like a colleague relationship or a business owner relationship or something? To be honest, like that is harder. And I always go, you know what, we're husband and wife first. So if I think that anything's going to be detrimental to that relationship, I, will just not go there with the kind of working together relationship. So that's, I guess, there's a bit of an explainer as to why I don't work on the farm with my husband. We just don't work well together in that setting. And I think there's a whole raft of reasons, right? That's its personalities, but it's also, he's done that. That's his business that he's done his whole life and knows what he's doing. I walk into that realm as a complete novice. And then, there's this dynamic because we're still husband and wife, and I don't like, it's just, like, what it's like when they're frustrated and I don't do well under that scenario. I'm like, yeah, you can't talk to me like that. Yes, I don't know what I'm doing. Spend the time to train me. You can't expect me to walk on and be like, you have no stock sense. Of course, because I didn't grow up on a farm. You've got no news sense. I don't expect you to come into the newsroom and, know what you're doing. Anyway, so that's kind of why we were like, well, look, maybe the bookwork is better because I can own that domain a little bit more. So yeah, there was a bit of an introduction, and I also had the help from our accountants as well to be able to ask questions, which was really, really important to check over things as well. I really wanted that done for a long time to make sure I was getting everything right and just to learn. And again, my husband really never did the books. So it was great because I was allowed to sort of like own it and thrive and not have to, although I was getting pretty frustrated sometimes with like, you can't have an invoice written on the back of an envelope. That's like, or like chasing up. Like I'd be like, this impacts my time. If you can't like tell me where that money has like gone or like what that was for, yeah, like you've got to have a system, and my system is, anyway. But that was, and to be honest, I suspect I'll do the books again sometime, like, but right now we've got a bookkeeper and I do help out here and there and oversee a few things, but yeah, I'm enjoying that break. And like I said, I suspect I'll probably get involved again later on. And who knows, maybe on the farm I will one day get more involved. I reckon it's just this constant negotiation between life and what's going on, like as your kids go through different stages and ages, as your career does, as the farm does, it's all about whatever works. Yeah.
Absolute season of life. And like every season on the farm, everything changes. And I love that that's so negotiable and fluid. And I completely understand when you're talking about the books and working with your father-in-law, because I work with my mother-in-law on the books. And that is definitely much easier than trying to talk stock numbers and why certain things are not lining up with my husband. Whereas
stock numbers, don't get me started.
Whereas if I can have that conversation with the accountant and my mother-in-law, it definitely does go smoother as well. So for those who are listening, if you are taking on the books or you have taken on the books and things are not lining up, please reach out to your accountant. Please reach out to someone else. It doesn't have to be hair pulling.
Yeah, and it's just that dynamic. It's a hard balance, I think, of that husband and wife when you're in the business role. And I don't know about you, but like having worked in, like a corporate setting, professional setting my entire life, to just be like, I don't know, it's just so different. Yeah. And I struggle with that.
One of my previous roles, which I bring a lot of experience to on the farm, is work health and safety from a mining point of view, and then coming onto the farm and being like, well, I don't think you should actually do it like that. You probably should put the guard on.
You must do your head in. I'm just like, I don't want to know, honestly. Yeah, it's just terrifying, isn't it?
It's taking the skills and the ability that we have and bringing it into the family farming operation and then molding that so that it works. So instead of just like trying to really talk about like the statistics or certain elements of the book or certain elements about safety, it's now like I'll set my alarm because they're doing haymaking. So I want to call them at certain points during the night just to check on them for a chat, see if they want something or need something, whereas I'm actually doing my safety check, but not actually letting them know that that's what I'm doing.
Very smart. Yeah, I started kind of being like, okay, I do the books on Fridays. That's my day. So I need to have everything in by then. If I don't, because that idea of, she'll just do it whenever, it's like, no, I've got a day for this. It has to be something so urgent for me to have to open my computer, log in, do the thing. I pay on this day, so get it to me ahead of that day.
Yeah, absolutely. And actually, I love that is a pattern that's emerging with quite a few of the other interviews that we've done, is finding those boundaries and setting those boundaries. Otherwise, you just feel like a crazy person running around. You find what the boundaries are in the season of life that you are and implement those.
Yeah. Otherwise, I'll be getting a text message now, or can you just quickly do, and you're like, just like, I'm in the middle of something, Friday. I'll deal with it on Friday.
Yes, no, I used to get those as well. And I was like, can you just, no, I've got 3 kids. There is no, can I just?
Yeah. It's like, during harvest and stuff, it's different. I remember last harvest, like I was working in something and my husband really needed something. And I was like, yep. And I drove an hour and a half to Ballarat and back, and he needed to go then. And yes, I had a plan for my day and what I was trying to achieve, and I normally wouldn't drop it, but he knows now. He normally wouldn't ask, and I know it was harvest and they needed this part. They had to stop. They were effectively unable to work without this part. And so I was more than happy to do that because I knew how important it was. And, to be honest, it helps you kind of feel part of it too. I was like, okay, I know this is critical because, when you're harvesting and you can't actually get the crop off, like that is a big deal. Totally happy to drop everything, but not happy to drop everything because you haven't had, the foresight to just kind of plan your week a bit.
Absolutely, 100% agree with that. In supporting this podcast and YouTube channel, we want to make sure that you are not going home empty-handed. Then please continue to support the channel by purchasing Tupperware using the link below. Tupperware helps you in the kitchen and down the paddock. Whether you are looking at food storage, kitchenware, servingware, items for the kids, lunchboxes, or whether you want to be eco-friendly minded, then check out Tupperware using the link below and selecting Karcher Williams as your consultant at checkout. That will help support this podcast and you get Tupperware in return. So thanks, guys. Let's jump back into today's interview. So do you think some of those things that we've just touched on were some of the hardest points about moving to the farm, or was there other hurdles and tough points that you needed to negotiate and find your feeding on?
I suppose, you mentioned sort of the kids, and I remember when they were younger how hard it was to just, I remember with harvest again, like, delivering food and like happy to do that, happy to play that role of like, okay, yep, get the food. But I'd be like, honestly, it's so hard for me to be like delivering food at 8 o'clock at night. I'm trying to get the kids, when you had a 1-year-old and a 3-year-old, like they need to be in bed and I need to do the whole routine and get them organized. Can I do it? It was like, look, I can feed you, but I've got to do it at sort of 6 o'clock, or you wait till 9, or you come and pick it up or something. I can't be delivering it to you when you want. Yeah, I found that really hard because, when they're little, now it sort of doesn't matter so much. My children are 7 and 9, and that kind of bedtime, like that whole witching hour thing, it's you still got to get things done, but it's not as critical. So I suppose that was one thing, like as in, I think sometimes when I think it's true of maybe anyone who's just not at the home base all the time, and understanding that you're not being like some kind of person who's, completely rigid. It's like you don't understand the stress that it brings me in my life. Yeah. And it's not their fault. It's just that they don't see it because they haven't seen it.
Absolutely. 100% agree on that. So we're talking about communication, so making sure we're really clear, and then making sure, we've already mentioned boundaries. So communicating those boundaries, first communication, highlighting the problem and the troubleshooting, and then also saying these are my hard boundaries and these are my soft boundaries, especially around peak seasons like harvest or shearing, or for us it's bull seasons and haymaking and all of that. So definitely needing those different boundary types and that communication, because they aren't there a lot of the time, and so they do not understand. So really taking the time to talk about those pain points with them is so important.
Communication, you summed it up. That's what it is really. And I think like it's like taking time, and you understand as you kind of work out what your husband's like and what you're like and how to best communicate, I think, over time. And just I'm going to say this, don't take it the wrong way, but like, just men are a bit stupid. Like you just have to be explicit. I just have this kind of thing, like my husband is a beautiful person. Like he's the most generous person, honestly, that I know. He is like he's got this really ginormous heart, but he's just a little bit stupid when it comes to stuff. Like I think many men are. Like, they're just not as emotionally intelligent as us. And so things that you think are so obvious, you have to spell out. Like, as soon as I say to my husband, actually, I'm not going okay because I'm really tired. I haven't slept because I've been up with the kids for 5 nights. And actually, this really stresses me out. Say, like that harvest example I gave you of the food. I want to be able to help you, but yeah, if I need to be able to do it like this, otherwise I end up just all over the shop. And it took me a while to kind of understand that I needed to communicate that. Like, for a while, I thought I wasn't being the best wife and mother I could be by bringing these things up.
Yeah.
But, now that I'm nearly 40, I understand that that's not the case. But at the time when I was younger, I kind of, really kind of thought it was my fault if things weren't going well, that I wasn't capable of doing things. But now I realize, no. It's a partnership and we just need to help each other out. Yeah. And knowing that, like, my husband wants to help me out too. Like, and I think once you realize that, like, he wants to be able to help me out too, even though he's like can be sometimes really tunnel vision on the farm. You just have to explain it.
Yeah, completely agree with that. One of our biggest things was I ended up having to take 12 months off just to find my feeding with the 3 kids once we had 3, because there was that not understanding of, what do you mean you haven't thought about dinner yet? Or why aren't we on top of the washing? And it's like, well, if I'm working all day down the farm with you, when do I have time to cook and clean and do the washing? And it was kind of that communication point of, oh yeah, we haven't been getting in till, you haven't been getting in until it's witching hour, and then you got to feed the kids, bath the kids, get them to bed, and then Ned will get in later at like 9 or 10 o'clock at night, and then I need to think about, the next day's food, or then doing the washing on top of that. So it's like, well, where do we fit that in to the farm date? I come home for lunchtime just for an hour. It gives the kids a break and I can put a load of washing on, and just working those little things into the day for the expectations and communicating something very common that is behind the scenes that they don't see.
That's massive. Like, that's hard enough with 3 kids on your own, like when you are at home. Like, that's a massive win to end the day with the washing done and dinner on the table with 3 kids, like young kids at home. Like, to be out on farm all day and somehow get that magically done. That's like an insane expectation. It's actually impossible.
Yeah. But without those conversations, they're like, oh yeah.
Yeah. Men are a little bit stupid. Just you've got to let them know.
With your 10 years on the farm and the experience that you have had, is there any other advice, tips, or hacks that you would give to someone who is moving to the farm for the first time, whether they're coming from an agricultural background or not? What would you tell them that you thought might have helped you early on in the piece?
Yeah, well, communication and boundaries and working that out. But I think another thing that I've learned is having those difficult conversations, because sometimes I think as women, again, we take it on ourselves and we think we can't say anything, or it's our fault or whatever. But just being brave enough to say, this isn't working for me, or I'm not doing okay. Is there another way of doing this? It actually builds trust in your relationship too. So, and when you see your partner, and like, I had a recent experience of this, I was overwhelmed with having too much on my plate in just all aspects of my life, and the farm stuff was just one of those facets. And, having that conversation, and my husband, to his credit, stepped up and took on more than his fair share, to be honest, and still is now, because I needed that assistance, and it's just built that emotional trust and made our marriage stronger. And I think that is kind of the beautiful part of it, is like, okay, when you do have these issues, you've got to be open and communicate and find the boundaries that work for both, because I'm sure husbands like have issues where they go, gosh, why can't she see that I've got so much on the farm? Or, our men in our lives aren't great sometimes at opening up, and they protect us. Like, I know my husband will protect me from kind of like perhaps what's going on the farm or the stresses that he's having by not telling me. But again, by opening up and saying, you can tell me, I want to know if you're not doing okay. Please tell me, or if this is too much. Or sometimes some men don't even have the ability, like, you can see they're stressed and they don't even have the ability to kind of tell you, I'm stressed because of this. You kind of almost have to sometimes work it out for them, and then softly say, do you think it's this, or is this, and then say, how can I help you? I don't know. That's what I've found. I mean, everyone's different, right? And all men are different. But like, going back to men are just a little bit emotionally backward. I find that I'm like, okay, it's actually a good thing for me to be upfront with how I'm feeling, because I can recognize it. But to even kind of suggest to him, when I can recognize it in him, do you think maybe it's this? And I found that's worked.
Or sometimes even identifying when they're so focused on a problem on farm, identifying that maybe that is stressing them. Sometimes they're so focused on trying to problem solve, they're not noticing how much it's stressing them. So being able to pick up on that and then try and work that backwards as well. Oh, are you having trouble with something on the farm? And sometimes those conversations we feel like, oh, am I being a little demeaning? But at the same time, like, the conversation's got to be had. And if they're not bringing it to the table and it's impacting the relationship or it's impacting on day-to-day life, then you've got to bring it up. You've got to have that chat about it, because sometimes they might not even notice that it's really impacting themselves.
Exactly. And that's I guess one of my boundaries that I've always had is like, I always put our relationship first. For me, like, our relationship comes before the farm, like 100%. Like, I married my husband, I didn't marry the farm. Yes, he comes with the farm and it makes him happy, and that's why I'm there, and I very much enjoy where I live. But, our relationship comes before the farm, and his health and my health. So it's, and I think you never want to lose sight of that, because I think people can fall into that trap of thinking the farm comes first, and it doesn't.
If you can't look after yourselves, then you can't look after the farm. And when those big days and big seasons happen, you fall in a heap. So you've got to look after yourself, you got to look after your relationship, and then you can look after the farm. Yep, the farm has a lot of the priority, but you've got to look after yourself and your relationship, because otherwise, why is it worth it? Why are we here?
And like, yeah, exactly. Like, if my husband didn't want to farm anymore, then okay. Like, I'm not with him for the farm. Like, it's like, just get a bit of perspective. I think, it's like, I love the farm life and I don't want to leave or anything like that. But if the farm was going under, or if there was something else going on, then I am prepared to sacrifice the farm, right? Well before I would sacrifice my relationship.
I think that also comes with that, that outsider experience that we have, because we haven't just done farming, or we haven't just come up through the family farming operation thinking, yes, we're going to take this on, and yes, I've worked for this for my entire life. So while that is really important to be part of, the relationship and the fallback to being like, yes, we can do something else should you wish. And sometimes knowing that background can really help them problem solve on farm, or not feel so like they'll be left without anything. Like, we're all here, we've all made the decision to commit to the farm. But if another season of life comes, if we can't deal with the next drought, we can take temporary leave and come back. Or, what is not working for us because we have inherited that, we can change that, or we can see how that looks, or it doesn't mean we can't experience other things outside. And definitely having that outsider experience and knowledge means that we can support them sometimes better or in different ways for that farming background when they're having trouble.
Yeah, and it is a hard one though, isn't it? I thought, okay, let's just test what I just said. Of course I want the farm for my children, and I absolutely have that dream of that farm, and it's been it's been in my husband's family, and that's the kind of, I do absolutely 100% want that. But yeah, like if it came to the crunch of something, then yeah, it's like nothing's worth your happiness.
No, absolutely not. Absolutely not. Was there anything else that you'd like to add in today's interview? Because that has come to the end of any of my official questions. So is there anything you'd like to add?
Oh no, look, I mean, it's been a really lovely chat, and so many important things. And I just think what you're doing is so important for, women particularly who have come to farming from a different life. I think, yeah, that the friendship thing, there's no one right way, I suppose. It just depends on what you want to do, but I think it's so worthwhile to listen to other people's experiences and to learn what worked for them, perhaps. And so you can think, oh, that might work for me, or maybe I'll try that out, or yeah. So I think it's a really important thing that you're doing. And another great podcast is called Ducks on the Pond, which is of course my podcast, and it's for rural women as well. And we talk about all sorts of stuff, from farming to careers to business to whatever, but all from a rural women's perspective, because yeah, our lives are different, right? Like they're just, when you talk about starting your own business as a woman, it's on a farm, it's totally different to other contexts. Or when you talk about motherhood, it's different on a farming context. I love your podcast and think it's so important.
Thank you very much. And tell us a little bit more about your business with the Rural Podcasting Co. Where can we find you there, and where can we find you with Ducks on a Pond? I'll link everything below.
Awesome. So, yep, have websites, and Instagram's a great way to follow us as well. So the Rural Podcasting Co. kind of like spun out of Ducks on the Pond, which is my podcast, which is, doing its own thing, which is great. But I really wanted to create a business doing something that I love and that I think would be useful. So now I have a business that's dedicated to telling rural stories of all kinds, whether it's agriculture related, ag tech, or more of that social stuff. Because I think that we, as in rural Australians, need to get our stories out there in a way that is positive and useful for us, and also for our city counterparts. Like, you might remember being a city person, I had no idea about agriculture or farming. I had zero connection. I guess I was exposed a little bit when I was a reporter, but really only basic understanding. So I think, there's so much talk about, how our food's grown, which is great, but there's so much misinformation as well, that we really need to kind of step up and say, hey, this is what we do, and this is why we do it, and this is what life is like for us, and these are the challenges, these are the opportunities, because there are so many opportunities. Like, I love living on a farm. I love living in rural communities. I love the people in rural communities. I just think we need to be able to tell our own stories better. So that's what I started this Rural Podcasting Co. for. I help people who want to be podcasters by coaching. And I also create podcasts for organisations and businesses, if that's what they're thinking of doing. All you have to do is be in some way rurally aligned, and I will work with you.
Absolutely beautiful. Thank you so much. As I said, I'll log all of that below. And guys, thank you for joining us for another week here on the farm.